And we're back on Capitol tonight. Criminal justice reform groups are again calling for changes to the parole board system after an apparent suicide of an inmate at the Fishkill Correctional Facility. John MacKenzie's death came after he was denied parole for the 10th time, despite what a judge called a, quote, perfect institutional record for 35 years. Advocates say MacKenzie was denied parole because of the nature of his original conviction, killing a police officer during a burglary in 1975. And they argue that the board should have focused more on his behavior since his crime, with all of his years incarcerated. With me now to talk more about this case and the parole system in general, we have Naomi Jaffe of Capital Area Against Mass Incarceration. Also with her is Amani Alugbala and Victoria Reyes. Thank you so much for being with me, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Naomi, we'll start with you. First of all, you just came from a demonstration. You put it together fairly rapidly. It was in response to Mr. MacKenzie's death, and it was, my understanding is, as you explained it to me, quite moving.
Yes, many people in the parole reform community knew John MacKenzie and were watching his case very hopefully because he was a model prisoner and because he had won at the lower court level a challenge to the parole board's denials. He'd had repeated denials, as you said, 10 times. He'd been in prison for more than 40 years. And he was sentenced to 25 to life. So all of that additional time was in effect a sentence by the parole board based on nothing other than his original crime, which kind of subverts the concept of parole.
So this death has not been officially ruled a suicide yet, but you did have a letter that he left that was read at this event, and it was clear that it was in direct response to his denial that he had decided to take his life?
It was in response to repeated denials and also to very oppressive conditions at Fishkill, which he called Fishkill Auschwitz.
Well, which is under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office for an unrelated incident, actually. So
and for brutality generally.
Yeah, I want to just broaden this out, and so Amani and Victoria just jump in, whichever of you would like to address this. I mean, it seems this issue has been ongoing for quite some time, and the governor actually addressed it in his last State of the State. But you've not seen sufficient progress, in your opinion, either of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of legislation, there's a bill that can be passed, which is the Safe Parole Act, and that bill the purpose of that bill is to prevent the parole board from continuing to act as a resentencing body, because essentially what happens in the case of John MacKenzie is highlight to this. The parole board acts as an additional sentencing body, which essentially undermines the entire concept of parole and sentences. When someone is given a sentence 25 to life, the idea is that there will be some opportunity for a person to get out of prison. And so legislation like the Safe Parole Act is an opportunity for the governor and the legislators to act.
And they have not. It's not been passed?
There are signers for the bill, both in both houses, the Assembly as well as the Senate, but currently, no, it is not.
There was a system, actually, that was supposed to be put in place, other states are using it, to determine whether or not a person is a high recidivism risk, and if in fact they are perhaps ready to be released. And this parole board has been reluctant to employ it. Is that correct?
Yes. It's called COMPAS. The one that's used in New York State is called COMPAS. It's a risk assessment tool. It was mandated by a change in parole law that took place in 2011, and the legislature intended for this risk assessment tool to be a guideline to the parole board. The parole board has failed to implement it, has continued to issue denials in boilerplate language that say you will be a risk to the community. Your release at this time would undermine respect for the law, which is a code for we are relying entirely on your original crime.
Yeah, and we're talking about political appointees. I mean, that's how you get on the parole board. It's a political appointment.
It is a political appointment.
Amani, what brings you to this particular debate?
Several reasons. I can't imagine a citizen being aware of what's going on and not feeling called to act. I think this case is frightening, and it really brings the urgency of the situation to your face, meaning that John MacKenzie was what you said, a model citizen. Not only did he do everything that was asked of him in prison and by the parole board, but he created all these like systems and programs that were beneficial to other prisoners, allowing them to rebuild, rehabilitate, and create a life for themselves that would allow them to re-enter broader society. And so in a case where a person not only does the time that was served to them and actually has positive contributions to society during that time served, and this person is continually denied any kind of justice because of what their original crime was, like everyone has already said, it subverts the purpose of what parole is. And it's really just frightening for me because, like, what's the purpose?
So the thing is, though, in this instance, it would seem, Mr. McKenzie's case, but generally speaking, you've got a lot of people on your side. You've got the courts on your side in the case of Mr. McKenzie. You have the governor on your side in the case of parole reform writ large. You have a number of elected officials in the legislature on your side. You've got the New York Times editorial board on your side, whether or not you aspire or espouse or believe in the New York Times editorial board, they're quite powerful. So what's the holdup? Pardon me.
Very, very strong opposition has come from the police and the police organizations.
Right.
Tremendous political pressure from police and their allied forces, and we have very much reason to. They organize a campaign to ensure that there is a flood of letters coming into the parole board against release of people who have ever killed a police officer. And despite what the law says, the police believe that someone who has killed a police officer should never get out of prison, and their word trumps the law. So it's our feeling that in a country that it's a very dangerous situation when political pressure from police trumps the law.
So this to you is an extension of the Black Lives Matter movement and criminal justice reform writ large?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, in every facet of the criminal justice system, from the moment you interact with it from a police stop, and really before this even goes to school and all the way down the line. However, from the moment you interact with a police officer till the moment you're released, and then after that when you're on parole and everything in between, there's injustice upon injustice upon injustice at every single layer. And so,
pardon me, before we run out of time, what comes next for you in this campaign?
One of the things that was very exciting about today's demonstration is that it was organized by a very wide allied group of activist organizations, and it was simultaneously organized in New York and Albany. And we expect that coalition, that very broad coalition, with a lot of popular support in our communities that are suffering from this, to go forward promoting legislation and education and mobilization.
And just very quickly, I mean, this whole question of criminal justice reform in the Black Lives Matter movement has now been kicked up a notch because of the presidential campaign, and you're having a lot of really heated rhetoric going back and forth, and also, for example, figures like outgoing New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton really belittling the movement. I mean, does it give you concern that things will come to a stalemate because of the political process right now?
What things will come to a stalemate?
Any movement that might be made at the legislature, any reform possibilities that could be made in Albany?
I don't know if I missed it, but I'm not really sure about why any stalemate would happen. As one of the representatives and the founding members of the Capital Area Upstate New York Black Lives Matter chapter, I think that most of us have been organizing in this stride for years before there was a title to organize under, being Black Lives Matter. And I feel like this is just a continuation of a long civil rights battle that we've been involved in for decades. So I really don't see any derailment.
And to piggyback on that, I'll say the civil rights movement met opposition at every level of government, both local, state, and federal. And that's no different here with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Well, I thank you all for coming in. Obviously, this is a subject that we could debate and discuss for quite some time. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
That's all the time we have for this evening's show, but we will be back tomorrow night at 8. I'll be speaking with Senator John Bonasek. He's the chair of the Racing and Wagering Committee. We'll talk about daily fantasy sports and more. Also, Eileen Braden of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce will join us. In the meantime, you can get more news online by checking out the State of Politics blog. That can be found at nystateofpolitics.com. Thank you so much for watching this evening. Have a great night and be well.